She had just stepped off the plane, tailored, poised, every step wrapped in quiet authority, when two officers stormed toward her, barking commands before even asking her name. They didn't see the press badges flashing behind her or the legal folder in her hand. They saw a black woman in a power suit walking off a private jet, and that was enough. Without warning, they slapped on the cuffs, their hands trembling more than hers. In just 5 minutes, they didn't just arrest an innocent woman. They handcuffed their own careers to a scandal they couldn't undo. She didn't scream. She didn't resist. She looked straight ahead, eyes locked not on them, but on what was coming. Who was this woman? Why did the mere sight of her threaten them so deeply? The jet behind her symbolized the power she earned. The cuffs on her wrists? Nothing more than the illusion of control. Comment where you're watching from, because what happens next flips every uniformed lie upside down. The sun hit her shoulders like a spotlight on truth, but ignorance moved. Faster than justice that morning. Ava Sinclair, 34, had just returned from an international human rights summit where she delivered a keynote on racial equity in law enforcement. Fierce, brilliant, and composed, Ava wasn't just another name on a boarding manifest. She was one of the sharpest legal minds in the country, a strategist whose reforms had already shifted courtrooms and headlines alike. Yet, on that private airport tarmac, as she descended the steps of a jet she'd earned through tireless work and sacrifice, none of that mattered to the two men waiting below. Officer Darren Cole, 40, had a reputation, not the kind carved in medals, but whispered in side conversations. Known for stopping black travelers under the excuse of routine checks, Darren wore his badge like armor against his bias. He saw Ava not as a diplomat, not as a decorated legal authority, but as a threat to be handled. And he handled her, aggressively, publicly, and without a single question asked. The jet behind Ava glistened in the sun, a symbol of her ascent. But as Darren slapped cold steel around her wrists, what echoed louder than the snap of the cuffs was the fragile sound of ego disguised as law. Dozens of bystanders stood frozen, some recording, some stunned into silence. Ava's team, attorneys, translators, dignitaries, watched helplessly as their leader was humiliated in the name of protocol. She didn't resist. She didn't speak. Her silence wasn't fear. It was calculation. Because Ava Sinclair knew something the officers didn't. Justice was watching. And this time, it was wearing heels. Ava stepped off the jet with her phone in one hand and her mind still lingering on the summit she'd just left behind. Global reforms, urgent policies, new alliances. The wind caught her hair as she descended, a quiet force wrapped in elegance and control. But before her heels could touch the tarmac, the shift in energy struck like a wall. Two officers moved in with quick, stiff strides. Officer Darren Cole, leading, jaw clenched, eyes locked on her like a target rather than a traveler. No greeting, no explanation. Just a barked command. ID now. Startled but calm, Ava reached into her blazer pocket. "Excuse me, may I—" "Hands where I can see them," the second officer snapped, cutting her off mid-sentence. Ava froze. Not out of fear, but disbelief. The protocol was wrong. The tone was wrong. Everything about this moment reeked of UD. Assumption and authority gone unchecked. "I'm a federal—" She tried again, but Darren didn't care. With a swift motion, he grabbed her wrist, twisting it behind her. She stumbled, trying to hold on to her briefcase as the cuffs clicked into place. The leather case hit the ground with a muted thud, springing open, and pages scattered across the concrete. Legal briefs, identification, and a bold gold-embossed folder marked with the seal of the Department of Justice. It caught the sunlight, like a flare. Ava didn't resist. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes scanned the stunned faces around her. Translators from Geneva, journalists from Berlin, civil rights activists from Nairobi, witnesses who'd come to greet her. Now they were filming, recording. Silent. No one moved. No one stepped in. The wind carried her silence further than any outburst could have. And then, as if ignorance needed a final exclamation point, Darren muttered to his partner without shame, "She doesn't look like someone who should be on that plane." That sentence hung in the air like smoke from a match that had just lit the flame. The holding room was sterile. Gray walls, cold chairs, fluorescent lights humming like guilt. Ava sat in the corner, wrists still cuffed, posture straight, her expression unreadable. She hadn't said a word since being dragged from the tarmac, not even when the officer who shoved her in slammed the door behind him. Her silence wasn't compliance, it was strategy. She knew the law better than the badge that arrested her, and now she was letting the system write its own indictment. Her assistant, Maya, had been pacing just outside the room, shouting through the glass until they let her in for 60 seconds. That was all Ava needed. She leaned forward, voice level and unshaken. "Call the Attorney General, now." Maya didn't hesitate. The call went out, and within minutes the cracks began to form. A clerk finally scanned Ava's ID, out of protocol, or maybe curiosity, and the terminal beeped sharply. Then it blinked. Not once, not twice, but over and over. The screen flashed. Lead counsel, DOJ Civil Rights Division. The room shifted. The officer who processed her paled instantly, fumbled to unlock the cuffs, but Ava raised her hand. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice calm but layered with authority now fully unmasked. Down the corridor, shouting began. Ava's name was being repeated by security, by administrators, by the same officials who hadn't even let her finish a sentence earlier. Phones buzzed non-stop, because by now the videos had gone viral. News outlets were already requesting statements. Headlines screamed, "DOJ official handcuffed without cause at airport." Officer Darren Cole's face turned ghost white when his supervisor stormed into the room. "What the hell have you done?" the captain demanded, holding up a screen. "Do you know who this woman is?" Ava rose from the chair slowly, her poise unshaken. The cuffs, still hanging from one wrist, jingled lightly as she adjusted her blazer. The cuffs they placed on her hands, her assistant would later say in a press briefing, were the same hands drafting reform against them. There was no room left to run, no protocol to hide behind. As her boss from the Department of Justice arrived moments later, flanked by federal security and press photographers, everything turned. Ava stood tall as the press swarmed in behind her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The moment itself was louder than outrage. And now, the tables were no longer just turning. They were collapsing entirely. The fallout didn't take days. It took hours. By the time Ava stepped out of the holding room, her legal team had already begun mobilizing. They weren't panicked. They were prepared. What no one knew, not even Officer Cole as he watched the walls close in, was that Ava Sinclair had been working for over a year on a classified DOJ investigation into racial profiling at American airports. She wasn't just returning from an international summit. She was returning with global partnerships, drafted reforms, and a sealed report. Prepared for Congress. All she'd needed was one undeniable public moment. And Officer Cole had just handed it to her, gift wrapped in bias and brutality. Within 12 hours, her team released security footage, social media clips, and over 40 previously sealed affidavits from passengers and staff who had experienced or witnessed discriminatory targeting by airport police. Her arrest, captured from multiple angles, went viral. Not because she resisted, but because she didn't have to. Her calm, her silence, her dignity. It shamed every word Officer Cole had ever barked in false authority. Cable news anchors called it the moment the system tripped over its own power. Protesters gathered at major terminals. Attorneys general from 3 states contacted Ava's office requesting collaboration, and inside one quiet federal building, charges against Officer Cole were being drafted for abuse of power, misconduct, and unlawful detention. Ava wasn't satisfied with revenge. She was after revolution. She returned to the airport not as a detainee, but as a witness before a public commission. The same tarmac where she had been shackled now held a makeshift press stage. The microphone crackled as she stepped forward, gaze calm and focused. She spotted Officer Cole standing behind security lines, face pale, sweat gathering beneath his collar. Her voice was even as she looked directly at him. "You didn't arrest me," she said. "You exposed everything I came here to fix." Cameras flashed, and in that moment Ava Sinclair's cuffs didn't represent a moment of shame. They became the spotlight the system could no longer hide from. Justice didn't knock quietly. It thundered through courtrooms, terminals, and headlines. Officer Darren Cole and 2 of his fellow officers were suspended within 48 hours and indicted shortly after. The evidence was overwhelming. Their patterns of behavior, masked for years behind routine checks and unfiled reports, were finally dragged into the light by the woman they underestimated the most. And when the trial ended, they were no longer men in uniform. They were convicted agents of abuse, stripped of rank and reputation, their names forever tied not to power, but to the reckoning they helped ignite. But Ava Sinclair didn't stop at justice for herself. From the ashes of humiliation, she built something far greater, Flight Path Justice, a groundbreaking initiative designed to protect air travelers from racial profiling and unlawful detention. The initiative combined legal advocacy with real-time response teams stationed in major airports. Within months, multiple airlines partnered with her, committing to new anti-bias training and transparency policies. Ava met with lawmakers, and under her leadership, a national reform bill was passed. From now on, all ID checks had to be logged, justified, and reviewed by an independent accountability board. In universities across the country, her case became curriculum. Law students dissected the moment she turned silence into strategy, a wrongful arrest into legal firepower. But Ava didn't care for the praise. She cared that change was happening. Slow, but finally moving. Months later, she returned. To the same airport, same gate, same city. But this time, when she stepped through security, it wasn't in silence. The airport staff paused, nodding with reverence. One young officer placed a hand over his heart. A stewardess whispered, "Thank you." And as Ava approached the gate, someone clapped. Then another. The applause grew. Not loud, not theatrical, but steady. It wasn't for her name. It was for what she'd done with it. In a televised interview days later, Ava sat beneath soft lights, her hands folded, her voice calm as ever. When asked how she felt the moment those cuffs clicked around her wrists, she smiled faintly. "They saw handcuffs," she said. "I saw an opportunity." She boarded that flight, not as a passenger with something to prove, but as a woman who had already shifted the ground beneath her. The same runway where she had been bound now paved the way for others to walk free. And in that quiet, powerful moment, Ava Sinclair became not just a name in the system, but the system's most elegant correction. They tried to detain her future. Instead, she rewrote theirs. What began as an act of ignorance, a rush to assert power over presence, ended as a national awakening. Ava Sinclair didn't just endure injustice, she illuminated it, not with rage, but with grace sharpened by purpose. The cuffs they used to silence her became keys, unlocking reforms, revealing truths, and dismantling a system built on silent cruelty. Her story wasn't about humiliation. It was about what happens when one woman dares to answer violence with vision. Have you ever been judged by your skin before your story? What would you do if justice wore your face? If this story shook you, share it. Because silence protects injustice. And Ava chose the opposite. She chose to speak, to lead, to rise, not just for herself, but for every traveler, every student, every soul who's ever been stopped for simply existing. Thanks for watching. See you in the next story, where power isn't worn, it's earned.